Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March 20th regular meeting of Council. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. The first item on the agenda tonight is to welcome a new young lady whose name is Kylie. She's in the front row, being held by Mama. Hi, Kylie. The second item is the minutes of the public hearing held March the 6th, 2017. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Salter. Are there any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. I also need to have the minutes of the council meeting held March the 6th, 2017. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Salter, seconded by Councillor Burton. Are there any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Next, I have the approval of the agenda for March 20th, 2017, which is tonight. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Salter, seconded by Councillor Beale. Are there any errors or omissions, additions or deletions? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Thank you. Well, to start off the meeting this evening, we have some very special presentations, and I'm going to invite the Fire Chief, Chief Mark Norris, to make a presentation. And I believe that just to cover briefly what Chief Norris is about to tell us is that there's awards being made this evening, and I'll let him get into the detail. The other thing I would like to say before going any further to our firefighters and to the public at large is that you know, there's 4 words that make up the motto of the fire department for Parksville, and one of the big words in there is courage. And anyone that volunteers to go into harm's way for our fellow citizens really has the earmark of true courage. And we're very, very proud of this council, and I know that the citizens of Parksville are very, very proud of the fire department and its members. So without further ado, Chief Norris, would you please go ahead?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm pleased to have the opportunity here this evening to, along with Council, recognize several of our volunteer on-call members with the Parksville Volunteer Fire Department for recent certifications that they have achieved. In order to meet the recognized local and provincial standards, our members dedicate many, many hours to training. The benefit of this training is on display through their ability the ability of these members to effectively deal with the fire and rescue emergency situations we face almost every day. Tonight we're going to be recognizing 2 groups. The first group we'll recognize was they've completed their NFPA 1001 Level 2, the standard for firefighter professional qualification certification. This signals their ability to operate at the full service fire department level in the province of British Columbia, and the certification represents approximately 600 hours of dedicated time to achieve the certificate. The second group that we'll recognize this evening has achieved the NFPA 1021 Level 1 standard for fire officer professional qualifications. This training prepares members for the responsibility of leading firefighters on the emergency scene and around the fire station during training and other duties. Additionally, these members have participated in extensive training in incident management, related decision making, and this training represents about 200 hours of training put in by these members. So at this time, Your Worship, I would ask you to join me up front for the presentations, if you would. Okay, if at this time, to recognize the completion of NFPA 1001 Level 2 Standard for Firefighter Professional Qualifications, I'd like to call down Christopher Bergestad, Mark Chandler, Tad Crowe, Andrew Wiersma, Senior Firefighter Sean Wood, and Tom Zankita. Chris? Mark? Tad? Andrew? Congratulations. Sean? Congratulations. And Tom. Congratulations. So we'll just pause for a photo, guys. The second group is for the NFPA 1021 Level 1 Standard for Fire Officer Professional Qualifications. I'd like to call down Senior Firefighter Gerald Ferguson, Senior Firefighter Tim Lutzen, Lieutenant Paul Roy, Firefighter Bill Tack, and Senior Firefighter Mike Weeks.
Just for the information of those who are watching and those in the audience, they have to leave because it's practice night, so they can't stick around. Don't know what they're missing. Anyway. Okay. We have 3 delegations this evening, ladies and gentlemen. And our first delegation is no stranger to this council or to the city of Parksville, Joanne Sales of Broombusters. Joanne, please come up to the microphone. I hope you're feeling better. Good. Turn on the microphone and...
Okay, thank you. It's Mayor, Council. This is...
I'm going to get you to speak into the microphone, too.
Can I bring it any closer?
That's
here?
it. Good.
Does it work now? Okay. This is actually the 10th year that I've come and talked to Council, and it's the 10th year that Parksville has taken part with Broombusters. So it was the second city to become involved, and we now have chapters from Campbell River down to Duncan. So you know, your commitment in the beginning years made a huge difference. It's like, oh, Parksville's doing it, Pelican Beach is doing it. So anyway, thank you very much. But I really feel like I'm kind of preaching to the choir, but I'm going to preach anyway, just to go through some of the basic information about Scotch broom that you'll hear again. I think I will. Okay, so there are some photos from our Broom Fest, the Parksville Broom Busters event that we had last year, and very much hoping to do that again this year. I think it was really inspiring for the city. And we actually... Oh, thank you. Okay. We actually have 2 women now that are Parksville residents who are sort of taking on organizing the events in Parksville. So really happy about that. So Broom Busters started in 2006, and as I said, we have chapters or area organizers in all of these areas. This is, of course, a familiar interchange to us, and it's really one of the most difficult ones to fix up because the soil is so bad right in that area. But we're working on it. Okay, and we all know about this famous field that's next to Buckler Fields. When the forest is cut down and the broom is close by, this is what happens. And actually, we can be kind of thankful for this because this is a very convincing photograph. This is what happens on the power lines, and the power lines that's how the broom travels to brand new areas. Another picture of it. And you can see in this photo also where the broom is getting into the young forests that have been replanted there. But the broom grows faster and it grows bigger, and it takes all the nutrients and the soil, the nutrients out of the soil, and it takes the water and so on. So the broom really prevents the forest from regrowing. And with the climate change, invasive plants development, it's becoming more and more difficult for our forests to grow back in balance and good health. So we need to do whatever we can to protect them. So here's the list of what's wrong with Scotch broom. It's an alien invasive plant. No, it's not native here. Spreads rapidly and densely anywhere in the sun. So it's not naturalized. It just will take over anywhere in the sun that it can. Forms dense thickets, crowds out native plants, leads to dramatic loss of diversity, slows and prevents forest regrowth, causes allergies. Our focus for this year is highly flammable. Toxic to grazing animals, and that's wild animals as well, changes soil chemistry and makes farmland useless. So here's the 2 myths. One is that you can't stop broom, and we found out that you can, you just have to do it right. Each plant makes 18,000 seeds, and those seeds fall in the soil and they live for 30 to 40 years, which means if you then disturb the soil, those seeds are going to sprout. And that's why cutting works, but digging and pulling do not work. So it was a different strategy that actually it was a railroad man here in Parksville that was the one that told me, hey, try this, and it actually works. So the other myth is that broom is naturalized. No, broom is a bully, and it will continue to take over. It would like to take over all of our mountains. We can't let that happen. It gets huge. Here's some of the bigger plants in just a few years. This was Northwest Bay Road. Here's the estuary in Parksville. And the estuary was totally covered with broom, and volunteers continue to work there, but we've made really good progress, and that's with other community groups. Okay, here's our focus of the year. Thanks to Terry Peters. It's Fire Chief Night here in Parksville. Terry Peters is the Director of Emergency Services in Powell River, and he contacted us because he wanted to make a statement. Broom is a fire hazard. Scotch broom is a volatile flash fuel. The presence of Scotch broom will increase a wildfire's fuel load and escalate the fire's intensity, compromising fire situations and making them more difficult to fight. In Powell River, they have their power lines going right through the middle of the city, and the broom is there, and he says that it's like pouring kerosene onto a wildfire. These were pictures of Qualicum Beach's dry broom, I think in 2010. And this was what was on the Coastal Fire Service's website 2 years ago when we had the dry summer. 2 invasive species cause fire behavior and control concerns, broom and gorse. So this alone is enough reason for us to want to control Scotch broom. Okay, now we're getting to the fun. Okay, so last year, May 14th, these are the volunteers that showed up to cut broom in at the special event that Parksville sponsored. And we made a huge difference there. So, you know, when you come into town and you look at that area now, it really does look really different. Here's some photos from it. We had like 45 people, 50 people cutting broom for 2 hours. Of course, they were having a wonderful time. We had goats, we had music. And people like to cut really big broom. Broom is a soft wood, and it's not hard to cut, so, you know, you feel much stronger than you really are. So it's great to cut one of these, you know, big broom, and then you can carry it out, and you feel like you did something really amazing, which you did. So success, and let's do it again this spring. We would like to do that if the city is supportive of that. We also appreciate that Parksville uses their website to let people know what's going on, so it draws more volunteers. Something else we always need to talk about here is gorse. Unfortunately, the gorse is worse here than anywhere else in the city, on the islands that I know about. But this is the Noose's gorse, and I'm sure that's how it got into Parksville in the first place. Gorse is going to be blooming very soon, but it cannot be cut. It has to actually be used herbicides, which is why it's so hard for us to get rid of. But we did spend some time trying to cut the gorse just to stop the flowers from turning into seeds. So at least if we can stop the spread, that'll be a good place to start. That's the field down at the end of the highway. Just more photos of cutting the gorse. And, you know, we will get rid of it. We will get rid of the gorse here in Parksville. It will happen. So another reason why we want to thank Parksville is that now Parksville has a bylaw since 2012 prohibiting landowners from allowing invasive plants like Scotch broom from growing on private property. As property owners learn about the bylaw, we hope they will voluntarily remove their broom. And one of the things we do as broom busters is we loan tools, we teach people how to do it properly. You know, we want to make people successful in getting rid of broom, not to just bring in an excavator or something and then they've got to start all over again. Okay, of course, the problem always with all volunteer groups is we need more volunteers. And if this photo of the woman here, that is what Island Highway on 19A in Parksville used to look like. You know, so that just shows that we have made big progress. So the two greatest threats to biodiversity worldwide, number one is development, number two is invasive species. And we're the only ones who can protect our islands. And this is a reason why we want to protect our islands. We don't want to leave a worse situation with invasive plants, particularly gorse and broom, to the next generations. So we want our grandchildren to inherit the forests, farms, meadows, parks, and green space that were left in our care. So one thing is we're going to have a section of the presentation in the AVICC on April 9th, and we are also getting a brand new website. And we have two videos up now on our website. So one is how to cut broom properly, and the other was the 10th year anniversary of Qualicum Beach and sort of the strategies that they used to try to get control of broom. Well, they did. They have very little broom left there now, and that's where Parksville will be next. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Sales? Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your presentation, Joanne. I'm just wondering, with the broom and the gorse, are there any other species that could overtake them? I mean, for instance, when you plant a black walnut, you know, you take out most of the fruit trees around a black walnut because of the sap and the leaves and so on, and other plants don't like it, so you don't get a lot growing under a black walnut. But there must be other plants that might be companion, but then take over. Is there such a thing that would be?
Well, you know, the best thing to do, it's a really good question, because the best thing, like when I pointed out the area along the road that had the poor soil, the best thing to do is to have good soil and to plant grasses, salal, you know, the strong native plants, because once, if you're a little tiny broom seed, even if you could live for 30, 40 years in the soil, if you think you're in the shade, you're not going to sprout. right? So you can't tell the difference between a Douglas fir and thick grass. So as long as you can get thick grass growing, the broom is not going to sprout. And you can also just cut it then down at the ground level, and it will die. I don't know of any plants that will, we've kind of joked about this. It's like, okay, so if we let the blackberries take over, that will keep the broom from growing, but we don't want either one of those. We want to get back to our native plants. Does that help at all? Yeah, okay.
Councillor Burton.
Thanks very much for your presentation, and I particularly like the work you did up around the entrance to Parksville, where the Parksville sign is. Do you have any issues with BC Hydro? There was a time when they liked to have broom grow on the power lines because it doesn't grow to a height that they have to deal with it. Is that still the case?
We are hoping that, I think that, I know at least the hydro company in Powell River has decided to, it's not BC Hydro, but Brookfield or something. Anyway, they decided to add broom to the plants that they would ask to remove. Because of the fire hazard, we'd like the council, we'd like anyone to be able to approach BC Hydro and say, we just cannot have this fire hazard broom growing, rivers of yellow, growing and going through the islands. Because if a fire started in one place in August when everything is dry, it would be a real disaster. So what we're currently trying to do in specific places is to cut just fire breaks, just to say, okay, at least for this area here, we're going to try to clear it. But I think we need to get BC Hydro to work with us, and that's what we're hoping for.
Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very, very much for the presentation. I noted at some point that the aim this year, or the focus this year in Parksville, is the Highway 19A interchange. Is that correct? Would that be in the Craig Bay area? Is that the area you're referring to? Or
no,
are you thinking more close, just outside of the city limits, past Buckerfields there?
Actually, that was pretty unclear. We're open. We'll look and see. That's something that would be decided by the city as much as by us. But also the borders are kind of tricky. So we want the entrances into the city to look good. Even if it's on Ministry of Transportation land, we want to clear it up. We're also hoping to do more cutting actually on Highway 19, Inland Island Highway. We want to create a break between Parksville and Horn Lake Road. We want to get, except for where BC Hydro lines cross, we want to stop the broom from growing on the highway. So when people are driving north, they're driving along passing all this broom, and all of a sudden they get to Parksville and say, whoa, where'd the broom go? And the broom is gone until we get to Horn Lake Road. That's going to take a little while, but that's one of our secret goals. So anyway, yes, anywhere that's an entrance into Parksville, we want to work to clear that.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Councillor Salter.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Joanne, it's not a secret anymore because you just told us. But anyway, so I'm wondering, have you approached Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Forest, Island Timberlands, any of those people with regard to the gorse and the broom that's up on the power lines and running through the forest? Because, right, I see where the seedlings are actually disappearing underneath the broom. So have you approached them, and if you have, did you get a positive reaction? Or?
Well, we work pretty closely with the Ministry of Transportation, and I think the Ministry of Environment has something to do with us having a presentation at AVICC, because we did approach them. I kind of don't hear about things once they sort of disappear from, who's actually doing what. And we did work with Island Timberlands for a while. They have their own way of working with broom. Usually they poison it. The reason why we don't like poison is, well, we don't like poison, but also if you kill the plants around the broom, then it's going to come right back up again. But certainly they don't like broom, because broom is going to prevent the forest from regrowing. But we need to just stop letting the broom get up the trails, because that's when it gets out of control, the roads.
Joanne, I missed the date. What's the date this year? Do you have one yet?
For
for the cutting of the broom?
Oh, no, we don't have a date yet.
No date yet?
No, no.
Okay. I volunteered last year.
It was great.
And after a while, after about a half an hour on the job, I was wondering if we couldn't burn the stuff at a controlled burn, but I guess you can't because it's flammable, so it would spread.
You know, every year is different, and it's this year is so much wetter as possible. The fire crew in Bowser area one time had a controlled burn, so it must have been early enough in the season to do that. We could set an earlier date for having our broom cut too. It wouldn't be so hot, which would be nicer.
Last year you had goats in the area where we were cutting.
Yeah.
Are we going to have goats again this year? Is that
I'm
your
sure
plan?
that they would be happy to bring them as long as it's a place where they can have them safely.
But having to cut the gorse close to the ground, does the goats do the job?
I don't know that. I don't know whether they like gorse. Yeah.
No, not gorse.
Oh, with broom.
Do
No,
they-
you have to go back. They like to. They'll thin it out, but you have to still go
You
back
have to go back and
cut it
clean
down.
up. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Any
They're
further-
great with blackberries and ivy and so on, but you still have to do a little bit more work for broom.
So you'll let us know when that date is set.
Yeah, well, I'll contact you and see if there's
Okay,
anything
great.
work with the city.
Any further questions? Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. You actually just touched on burning, and that have we had any controlled burning in the Parksville area in the past? Just to see, like, I'm wondering.
Controlled burning of the broom. Once again, you're destroying the ground cover. As soon as you've got bare ground, the broom loves it. So you don't want to do controlled burning. Yeah.
It just makes. So have you found that your volunteers tend to stay broom busters from one year to the next, or are you lacking in volunteers, or is there anything?
With the more volunteers we have, the more we can get done.
Yeah,
So people do. It's addicting. You know, it's. I don't know if everyone who came out last year is addicted, but you know, it's really fun to do it. You know, so people do stick with it, but we always need more volunteers because then if we had enough volunteers, we could just do the whole interchange, you know, in one time, you know, or whatever area that we decide to do. So yes, come on out, every single one
Absolutely.
of you.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for everything that you do and for coming to council each year.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Any further questions? Thank you again, Joanne. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Okay,
And it's
thank you.
tough. It's tough work.
Yeah.
Thank you. The next delegation is the Parksville Downtown Business Association, the 2016 annual update. Pam Bottomley and Michelle Jones are here. Welcome. Make yourself at home.
Are we ready? So we're here tonight to present our 2016 financial statements and the 2017 budget as required by our establishing bylaw. And I believe everyone has received a copy of the statements and our budget along with our 2016 annual report, which looks back on our accomplishments over the past year and looks forward to our plans for 2017. Rather than going into the minute detail in the statements, I just wanted to highlight a few things from our 2016 plan, which included our third commercial on CTV2, which ran in the spring and the fall in the shoulder seasons. We had our second year of our youth ambassadors last year, and we had the best Christmas light up ever. And we'd like to thank the City of Parksville for working with us on the light up and helping to fund the lights on the Alberni Highway. We have got nothing but compliments on that light up, and I'm really excited to find out what we're going to do this year. I don't know. And also that we worked with the city on the completion of the wayfinding system last year for the planning part of it. Looking forward to 2017, we're going to continue with many of our programs as we usually do. In particular, we will continue on with our litter removal program, which is very capably provided to us by Inclusion Parksville, and we're thrilled to work with them again this year to do the litter pickup throughout the downtown core during the year. We will also keep going with our facade and safety grants that we offer to property owners and businesses to improve their buildings. We had 2 last year on Morrison Avenue that did improvements, so that was great. And then our website and business directory will get a further update again this year. And we're also looking forward to working in partnership with the city to move the pedestrian wayfinding system forward as envisioned in the Downtown Revite Plan and enhancing the pedestrianization of downtown Parksville. And we'd like to thank you again for letting us come and make this presentation. And if this time we need to request that the city approve release of the 25% of the tax levy as allowed under the bylaw, and would be pleased to answer any questions that anybody may have. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Members of council, any questions? We have the financial report, which we were able to read before this meeting. Any questions for the delegation? Yes, Councillor Beal. No, don't make the resolution yet. Do you have no kind of question? No questions, no comments?
I just wanted to say that the questions that I had formulated were actually answered in the presentation. I was curious to know how many businesses took advantage of the facade upgrade, so that's really great. And I know that I would agree that the light up has been very popular, and you mentioned what is coming, but I heard of the possibility of changing out the Sequoia lights for some colored lights in the coming year. Is that a possibility, or is that too far away that we could suggest that?
The city actually provides the lights for the sequoia tree, so I don't know. Is it too early?
Well, I want to thank you for all you do, and I want to tell you a story about the Christmas lights this year. I have some friends that don't drive at night. When they heard about the Christmas lights by word of mouth, they called me up and said, would you take us down Alberni so we could look at the lights? And I did on a couple of occasions, different people, and they found it truly impressive, and we're very, very happy that they saw them. So that's just a little story to thank you. The little things in life that count. Any further questions for the delegation? Okay, seeing none, I believe we're at a point in time now where somebody's going to make a resolution.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to make a resolution. I would like to, first of all, can I do all 3 of these together? No? Yeah, okay. I would like to recommend that the Parksville Downtown Business Association 2016 annual report and financial statements be received.
Have a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Patterson. We want to vote. Let's vote on that. Sure.
Thank you. And secondly, that the Parksville Downtown Business Association 2017 budget be approved.
Have a seconder for that. That's carried.
And finally, that staff be authorized to advance 25% of the levy funding to the Parksville Downtown Business Association as per bylaw number 1502.
Have a seconder. Okay, the next delegation, McDonald Gray Consultants, rezoning application for 151 Despard and 292 Stanford. Mr. Nigel Gray. Welcome, Nigel. Please turn the microphone on and...
Thank you again, Your Worship and Council, for receiving us today to speak to and introduce you to the Insight project proposed for the corner of Despard and Alberni Highway. I don't know if any of you know the Insight Group or the work they've done, I've had the chance to work with them for over 10 years on different projects, and Longwood Station in Nanaimo is probably the one that jumps to mind for everybody. Thornbridge at Longwood, and as well as the Hawthorne subdivision in Nanaimo, which is kind of a showpiece for integrated stormwater management on Vancouver Island. I'm going to keep it brief tonight and just speak to the proposed land uses. There's not a lot of detail on sites, as this is a master planning exercise, and we've really appreciated the opportunities that we've had with staff in planning and engineering to work through getting this one just right and tailoring it to the expectations of your OCP. So the addresses are 151 Despard and 292 Stanford. The property is quite large, which you cannot see from the road, but just to orient you, this is Despard Avenue to the south of the project, and Alberni Highway coming by on the west. On the other corner, there is kind of an existing house, Trillium Lodge, and the new VHA facility that does not show up on this slide, but it is there. So currently the property is zoned single-family residential, and I worked with the group at Insight to kind of do what the community envisions instead of just another urban sprawl subdivision. They're really easy to do, and especially in this market with limited lots available, it certainly is a quick fallback for a lot of developers in this day and age. So we looked at the OCP, and the OCP is really forward-looking when it comes to this corner. It looks like the community does expect some kind of nodal development, including mixed use and a little bit of a bridge between existing single-family neighborhoods. So the OCP designates the corner piece as neighborhood commercial, and that is to encourage walkable, complete communities, kind of all the current planning direction we have in a lot of communities. Bridging down from multi-unit residential, so essentially the folks that are going to feed those small neighborhood commercial components and live within walking distance. And then down to single-family residential, where we have adjacencies, where that's an appropriate transition from existing neighborhoods without any shock of too high of a density adjacent to you. And this is the actual slide from the OCP, so you can see there is direction to kind of build up around the intersection, which always makes sense to build on your existing services. Mixed use of component is specified across the road. The local grocery, I'm sure you all know, has been talked about for a long time as the new location for QF. I don't know whether that's going to happen or not, but it would make quite a nice relationship, having the healthcare, grocery, and a kind of complete little neighborhood node here. We're wrapping that node with multi-unit residential, and then beyond, as we move back to the neighborhoods, you can see single-family transitioning. So our proposed zoning, and I will show slides of where they're located, is a small lot zone. It is in name a small lot zone, although we do intend to do some site-specific pieces, which would be to have larger lots adjacent to existing single-family lots. I wouldn't want to have 3 neighbors behind me, so it's essentially going to have the same number of neighbors as you typically would in a standard subdivision, and then we can bridge down once we move away from those people's backyards. Just note that the standard lot size in Parksville is 560 square meters, so we would propose a 500 square meter lot right adjacent to them to kind of bridge down. So those lots are actually indicated here in kind of a lighter yellow, and you can see they're adjacent to existing single-family uses, and they are quite large on this proof of concept. I'm sure Blaine was quick to point out the end subdivision and the end of how these sites will look is not completely set in stone at this point. It'll depend on who develops them and what the end use is. So moving away from those larger lots into kind of your more typical small lot residential, which, I mean, I've made the argument to this council before on a number of projects. You're effectively doubling the density on that infrastructure over the long term, so you've got a way better tax ratio on this type of development. I think, with the number of projects we see locally here in Parksville and Qualicum and the success they're having, is kind of a no-brainer now. So beyond the single-family component, we're looking at bridging in again with an RS2, which is more like a townhome, patio home duplex scenario. So that would be moving from single-family to that use, where there is still some residential adjacency, but we're on the Alberni side of the highway, so it lends itself quite a bit more to that type of density. That site is up here in the northwest corner of the site, and you've just got a little vision of what that may look like in the future. The next piece is a high-density residential component, and that's coming in and surrounding that neighborhood core commercial that will be on the intersection itself. And the idea there is to build on your existing RS3 zone, so that is typically going to be apartment. And I do know that this developer has been speaking to some people who actually want to do rental. And this is not the only developer we're working with who's kind of keen on doing rental in Parksville, so that's a market we're going to see more and more coming into the area, and it's about time. So another thing we've been doing is not strictly doing high density anymore, but we've been working with other communities like Ladysmith on actually creating adaptive zoning, because the markets here are changing really quickly. And what we want to do is make sure that we're not creating solely rental apartments that only, kind of people at that income bracket or that age can use, but actually building into these dense structures the ability to have them be a number of things. So should there be a need in the community for independent living, assisted living, that we're not precluding that from the zoning of these multifamily residences. So it is a multifamily residence. It just allows for an additional care component if people don't want to move into a designated socially funded care facility. And it's kind of a typical thing we're doing whenever we encounter high density now. Those two sites, right now, Site D here we've got that earmarked for the standard high density zone that the city has. The Site B, we've actually included the additional uses, working with Blaine and the planning department. We'd be keen on doing that across the board in the multifamily, but for now, as a pilot for Parksville, I think it's definitely appropriate to do it on the one site. Neighborhood commercial, as I said, is on the corner, directed towards the corner. That's where your highest traffic is. That's where you're going to have potential bus service in the future to that site. And it's a walkable component of the greater neighborhood, not just what we're proposing from a master plan, but the way this community is kind of planned out around that area into the neighborhoods beyond and across the road. And the tie-in obviously with the health center, the proximity of that, I think will be a big draw for our market demographic coming to the area. Be there on the corner. So just kind of the next layer in terms of land use planning is walkability. The OCP speaks quite a bit about walkability and creating compact neighborhoods. So we had a look at what that means on this site. So on the proof of concept, we dropped in, we will be required to do sidewalks along Despard and Alberni. The idea is to have separated sidewalks. The way it's set up now, we've created a situation where the homes don't have driveways coming onto those major arterials, and that was a recommendation of our traffic report and in working with staff here. The idea is we don't have cars backing across a route to school, so all of those driveways are interior, and we are proposing to actually have kind of a standard building face to those roadways, in that it won't be a giant 2-meter tall fence that looks like a 747 landing strip like some places around here. But it'll actually have eyes on the street, so home windows will be able to look over a fence onto the sidewalk and see those kids going to school and keep an eye on what's going on. There is a series of internal walkways that will connect to those main routes. And just doing a quick overlay, this is how that would work on this proof of concept. So there are connections all the way everywhere through the community. This piece here is actually in your OCP on the transportation plan. So this is a proposed multi-use trailway. That would come all the way through the site and be dedicated as road to the city. I assume that would be required regardless of what subdivision went through in the end. Community benefit, we always talk about this, and it is in the staff report. So a number of potential amenities have been discussed in our conversations with staff. They are quite exhaustive. So we didn't want to tell council how to allocate their amenity. But it gives you the chance as policymakers to decide from that kind of full wish list of amenities how to attribute the funds. So in this case, the developer is willing to put $500,000 towards the city as a community amenity for the land lift in this case. Like I said, there's a lot of engineering items that have been brought up that may be appropriate, but you guys are the policymakers, and maybe you want to make a whiz-bang water park down at the community park instead or something. So we don't presume to know your minds on that. What are we asking for today? We want first reading, which would be fantastic, and that would allow us to go ahead and do our public information meeting, go out to the public, test them, and see what their concerns are, if any, regarding this development, build those pieces into our submission. Staff has identified a few things that need to be updated, and we do know that the one kind of key piece for us is the retail piece, so we want an impact assessment current The one we had is a bit old. It's from 2013, so we want a current one to make sure that what we're proposing is not going to compete with our good friends in the downtown core, and that it is a truly neighborhood commercial component appropriate to the development we've got proposed here. And I will take any questions if you have them, and happy to walk.
Thanks very much. Members of council, Councillor Burden.
Glad to hear the conversation about the fences. We had a quick conversation. I remember sitting in the gallery one day when Barry Johnson was discussing the development on the other side of the Alberni Highway and being quite vocal about the fences and the height of the fences, and he didn't get his way, and now we see that corridor down there. So I'll be watching and making sure that those fences are not creating a barrier from what you say, the eyes on the street. Quite a significant piece of the report is dedicated to the requirements of the engineering department. Any issues with complying with any of that?
No, and I think that's the piece that Blaine and I have been working on clarifying more for the layperson. It's even hard for us to understand. We are not engineers. So to put it in the simplest terms, we will be providing all of the off-site infrastructure to facilitate the land use as proposed. So there is a base requirement right now for a single-family subdivision that would have to be put in. Because of the densities we're proposing as a function of this rezoning, there are additional turning lanes and things like that required that we need to quantify better for council at the next presentation, so we can say this is what's required for a single family, this is what we're providing above and beyond to accommodate the land use we're proposing, and then what are those true wish list items to which you can attribute that amenity contribution. So that's the piece we're actually trying to sort out. Just to make it more clear, I think it's clear in the minds of the engineers, but we need to make it clear for ourselves. Yeah.
Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a couple questions here. So the original zoning on this property was R1, and so you're now requesting this change. So that the actual significance is going from around 117 units to looking like almost 400, right, on this piece of property. So it's a fairly significant increase. And so my question is very simple, and it may be to the city. Where are we going to get the water for this increased densification? Where will the water come from?
If I may, Your Worship.
Mr. Figueroa.
Councillor Salter. As part of the process, there's going to be a study that needs to be done, a water study, to determine the impact on our systems. So that's part of the standard process of the engineering requirements.
Last time I saw a report, I think that with the new water treatment plant, that there shouldn't be a problem, but we'll study it. Yeah. Go ahead. Any further questions?
I do. It's just I know that we're building a new water treatment plant. I don't see how a treatment plant is going to change how much volume of water comes through Englishman River. It's the same volume that comes with or without the plant. So that's my only concern is how do we supply the services to when we go for densification, how do we supply those services, both sewer and water, because they're basic.
You'll be answering that in your studies when it gets down to the. Or you're not?
Yeah, if I may, Your Worship. Yes, as part of the process, we have a consultant, Coors Engineering, that does a water model analysis just to identify if our systems are capable of handling it.
That's it. Just before I move on, I wanted to follow up on the water question. We spoke earlier today, and I know that you're into rain gardens and swales, and it's all mentioned in the. I hope at some point in time we can talk about water catchment of some sort, so that, you know, in terms of the common areas like lawns and gardens and washing cars, maybe that's something hopefully we can look at. I'll be talking to staff about that when the staff make a report.
At your requirements now for your development permit areas, you know, since my time when I was with the city, those have increased quite a bit, and we have used Parksville's development permit area guidelines for the private sites as a template for other communities like Cumberland. There are other things you can do, of course. From an on-site standpoint, the issue or non-issue is that those are all done privately. and that the maintenance of those facilities is borne on the private side of the line. And I can understand why that makes some engineering departments uncomfortable, because you cannot control whether those facilities are being maintained properly. It's great at the fire hall because we know that's a civic facility. It will be maintained in perpetuity, and it's Skookum, that one. In terms of doing things within the roadway, I mean, we don't really want to delay our application to get a new standard done for city streets. It can be done. There are other communities doing it. I mentioned Hawthorne and Nanaimo. That's one place we tried it. The issue with that one is we had to create a redundant system. So in the end, the infrastructure cost twice as much, and there was still a pipe buried under the ground. So in every community, we're trying to find the happy medium now. There's a huge maintenance cost associated with those facilities. And the one thing I've learned, Your Worship, is that an actual grass swale, while it isn't as pretty as the rain garden, when it comes to the side of a road, works quite a bit better over the long term and actually filters the pollutants in a more effective way. So we learn things every day in our profession when it comes to rain gardens. Yeah.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. If you did a tour on a previous council of some of the Insight properties in Nanaimo in regards to some of the
I remember visiting the Insight
and,
properties in Nanaimo.
And that, so I am a little bit familiar by doing a tour and seeing what I'm assuming is kind of what is looked at. How many phases will this project anticipate going through?
I haven't honestly run the numbers, but you can calculate 2.4 times 120 units on the two multi-sites, and then 76 residents plus the small duplex component. So there will be quite a few new bodies at the corner, and that's key to this functioning, is to having those bodies right adjacent to the retail components. This is the whole compact, complete community thing. That's the direction we're taking in planning theory these days.
Follow-up, Your Worship. So during the construction period, commercial first or residential?
I got you wrong. I thought you meant how many people will live here.
No, it's okay. That was part of the turnaround question.
I wouldn't know the answer to that question. I know the Home Builders Association website has a calculator for that. I haven't used it yet.
Okay. And then just one further follow-up. In the engineering and operations memorandum back in March of last year, when I was looking at underground utilities, do you know if the gas main had been installed in that area?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
Mr.
Thank
Figueroa?
you.
If I may, Your Worship, actually, I can't recall if the gas is in this location.
It said summer of 2014, so that's why I just wondering if those had been already dealt with. Thank you.
Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I just had another question. So our OCP also speaks to low-cost housing in developments. Is there any low cost? Is that the apartments? Or?
Well, I don't think you can guarantee an apartment's going to be low cost. What we have done, and it's a typical approach with communities now, is the way of kind of the carrot and the stick approach is Blaine's built in some language in the specific zones. So if somebody does come in to do rental housing and they're willing to meet our CMHC line for affordable housing, which in this area is quite high, to be completely frank, they can achieve a higher density on the site. So I believe it's a 25-unit bonus should you enter into an affordable housing agreement with the city for 10 years. And so what that does is lock those units in at the CMHC rate for 10 years. And the reason the developer does it is because they get 25 more units. And at the end of that 10-year period, they can then sell those units or rent them at full market value. And that has worked here in Parksville. And it's one of the only ways I've actually seen work, honestly, in most of the communities I've been in. We get into this discussion a lot when we're doing OCPs and zoning bylaws. Everybody wants affordable housing. In my professional opinion, it's a provincial government function. And the communities are doing the best they can at the municipal level in terms of creating the density bonusing structures and that. But unless you're going to generate a full administration arm for doing affordable housing, it's very difficult to do at this level for the cost.
Just one more, and that is that the regional growth strategy is directed to us from the province. So our OCPs have to follow the regional growth. So when you say the province are, yeah, they're pulling the strings, but we're still having to dance. So the OCP states that. So that.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to say too much. We could have a side conversation for a long time about the downloading of responsibilities on municipalities.
Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks for the presentation, Nigel. I'd just like to make a comment that it's nice to see something coming forth that has a mixture of housing types, because anything that I read about healthy communities would encourage a mix of housing so that we get young and old and a cross-section of people in a community, in a neighborhood. So that's refreshing.
Yes, Mr. Figueroa, go ahead.
Your Worship, yeah, I just want to correct one of my statements earlier. There has been, this is to do with Councillor Salter's question about the water main. There has been enough modeling done that indicates that in terms of the capacity of the off-site force mains around the development do have capacity. Some of the internal piping needed to be upsized at that time, but the external piping does have capacity for it.
And that's a report that will come forward in due time anyway, won't it? Yeah, thank you. Before I go on to other members of council, you and I had an earlier discussion today on another item which was in the report in the sustainability part. It said no rentals, but that's not the case, is it?
No, I mean, the discussion was similar to the affordable housing discussion. There's really no mechanism to guarantee tenure. I know some communities are doing it. In my opinion, again, that's ultra vires. It's not really within the power to mandate tenure. Others have differing opinions. But yeah, it's really hard to guarantee that those will be rentals versus a condominium strata. So that's just the nature of the beast when it comes to multifamily.
In terms of looking at this project and reading the report, I gather that you're fairly aware of the demographics. We have a shortage of workforce housing. We have a shortage of affordable housing. We have a shortage of senior facilities that would be. So I gather from your initial presentation that you've taken all that into consideration.
That's why we've been fighting so hard for this mix of land uses. It would be a complete failure on my part if that ended up being another sprawl subdivision. I can say to you that I know of a number of people coming in to do rental specifically. These are long-term investors. They're not your build and flip people. We kind of reached an evolution here in Parksville where it's come to a size where rental is very viable. It's a good long-term investment and a good return on your money over time. One site that comes to mind right away, which you'll see probably in the coming months, is the field of gorse down on the highway. We've got another guy coming in who wants to do rental there as well, and I know that the Chamber is aware of quite a few other rental projects that are coming on stream now. So I think we've kind of got a critical mass here, the kind of magic 20,000 number between the two communities, and we're getting Canadian Tires and rental housing, and the value of raw land is high enough now that it actually merits doing that. I mean, first thing that comes to mind is underground parking is ridiculously expensive unless your land values are high enough to support that. So all those components are feeding in to make it work now.
Thank you. Any further questions for Mr. Gray? Thanks very much. Thanks for coming. I'm sure we'll see you again. Thank you. We have one piece of correspondence this evening. It's the Ballina Secondary School. Everybody's read their reports, and it's a request for financial assistance for the 2017 Vimy Ridge Tour. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the first recommendation that the correspondence be received? Moved by Councillor Beale, seconded by Councillor Salter. All those in favor? Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to the second piece of second recommendation, and I'm going to ask Councillor Beale, who has something to say.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Yes, I would like to make a motion that this council award a sum of $1,700 for this request. You can fix the wording a little bit better, sorry.
Okay, and does anybody have any questions for that? Councillor Oates, you seconded. Okay, any questions on that motion? I'd just like to add that Vimy Ridge is where Canada really made its name in the world, and that's where it all started. And I wish I could go with the students to Vimy Ridge. I've never been. And it's, yes, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Whereas this group, I have a little bit of knowledge on that with. I just want to kind of comment a little bit that we're losing history as history continues and as time continues to go by, and our aging veterans, that a trip like this for our youth is so worthwhile. It is so memorable. These are really not frivolous young adults or or teenagers, and they're going to go places in this world, and not just there, but coming back. I think that you're going to see a presentation by some of our youth in our community as well.
Councillor Salt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is an opportunity of a lifetime for the children, and I would be hard-pressed to vote against it. I think the educational piece of this is significant, certainly the history, and also the ability to travel to Europe. I'm more than willing to support this as long as I get to go.
Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Worship. I would also request that staff contact Mr. Preston to let them know of the availability of some Parksville pins or some other items that could be taken along to share with perhaps their host families. I noticed that particularly their time in France, they actually will be staying with families, and hopefully they would like to come and visit our fair city at some time in the future. And also, I will actually personally follow up with a conversation as well with Mr. Preston. I wasn't able to get a hold of him right now. They're on spring break, but with some ideas of other fundraising opportunities that they might follow up with.
I'd also like to suggest that before Remembrance Day rolls around, we'd dearly love to have a presentation from this group about the experience and about their visit, and I'll guarantee I'll give them more than 10 minutes. So I think it's worthwhile. Councillor Oates.
Thank you, Worship. Just a couple of questions. The request was for $1,500 to $2,000. So why the $1,700 figure? Why not just go right to the $2,000? And isn't this an annual event?
I suggested the $1,700, noting that there are 17 individuals taking part, and that seemed to be a reasonable way to go. I do not believe that this is an annual event. I think that's part of, in fact, from reading something, it also has to do with a particular anniversary of Vimy Ridge this year.
I'd be receptive, just to throw that out there, I'd be receptive to going to the 2,000. Councillor Burton.
At the risk of channeling my inner Councillor Greer, I won't support this. I know that it's going to happen, judging by the enthusiasm around the table, and I wish them well. I think it's a great opportunity for these kids. I just believe that these kinds of requests belong with service clubs, in this case maybe the school district, and not with the taxpayer. So I'll be the lone nay.
Okay, that's okay. Any further discussion? Councillor Oates.
Is there any way we could tie it to matching funds from the school district to get Councillor Burden on board?
Councillor Beale, do you know the answer to that? No? All right.
I don't know. I do believe, though, that there are further opportunities for this group to raise additional funds, but I did note that the trip is coming up fairly soon. It is in April, so I'm thinking about that as well. I'm not sure that whether or not the school district is able to match funds like that. They may have already provided some in-kind support. I don't know.
When I look at the overall cost, it's not a lot of money. So I heard somebody say call the vote, so I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. we have just discussed with Mr. Gray. It's Mr. Russell, would you please give us the background on the issue regarding consideration of a zoning development bylaw amendment 151 Despard Avenue West and 292 Stanford Avenue West. And before I do that, I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendations. Councillor Burton and Councillor Oates. Okay, Mr. Russell, over to you, sir.
If I'm Your Worship, I'll be brief, as I believe it's been fairly comprehensively explained by the developer's proposal. The subject properties are proposed to be rezoned from their single-family residential RS1 zone to basically 5 different zoning designations consisting of smaller residential, a new high-density residential and care zone, a neighborhood commercial zone, a high-density residential RS3 zone, and a medium-density RS2 zone, as outlined in the report.
That's it?
That's it.
Thank you very much. Any comments or any questions for Mr. Russell? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor, I gather I can take all the 6 recommendations together? Is that okay? Okay, so all those in favor? Opposed? Thank you, that is carried. And I hope that, just a final comment from me on this, I hope that we can find some way about the water situation, some innovative ways. We should look at that as time goes by. Okay. Next report is from Chief Norris, and I believe you're going to give us the 2016 Parks Fair Volunteer Fire Department Annual Report. Chief Norris, over to you, sir. And we all have copies, right?
Thank you, Your Worship. The 2016 Fire Department Annual Report should have been in your packages. It looks like this has some pictures on the front of it. No, that's the second one.
Technology, it's great when it works.
Yeah. What are we doing here? Okay. So the presentation I have looks a lot like the one that is to follow. So if you want to follow along, you should be in this document here. So 2016 Parksville Volunteer Fire Department Annual Report. Just to review the mission statement for the fire department. Fire department strives to protect and support the community by providing outstanding service in the areas of fire suppression, emergency response, member training, fire prevention, public education, and charitable community service. And you can see our motto there, pride, courage, passion, teamwork, which the mayor mentioned earlier. Our fire protection area is the city of Parksville, as well as contract areas in the regional district, so French Creek all the way up to Johnson Road, so the light at Johnson and Drew Road, just past the home builders, as well as San Perel, Forno Road, Wild Green Road, Martindale Road, and the areas up behind Morningstar Golf Course are all our contract areas. And just a note that the whole Morningstar area up behind the Oceanside School is seeing tremendous amounts of construction and infill right at the moment. So as far as the organizational profile goes, I head up the department, obviously, and report to the CAO. And I have 2 assistant chiefs on staff. One is responsible for fire prevention. Fire prevention includes fire and life safety inspections and public occupancies, public education, and fire investigations, so investigating fires for cause, as we're required to do by the province. The other assistant chief is the chief of operations and training, and he takes care of our operational guidelines, directing, determining what we should be doing in operations, as well as the training for the department, which is one of the largest functions that we have at any one time. We have an administrative assistant that keeps us all organized, and then you can see that the largest group of staff we have are the volunteer on-call members, which we have about 32 of right at the moment. So just some highlights from 2016. We transitioned fire chiefs early in the year. We hired a new assistant chief, Mike Tisdall, when I left the deputy's position and took over as chief. I opened up the operations and training position. Our volume of calls in 2017 was the highest we've ever seen. And recruiting and retention, we still are seeing a turnover of people every year, becoming more and more of an issue. And we did over 9,000, well, right around 9,000 hours of training in 2017, which is a tremendous amount. And you can see a picture there of one of the fires we did on Rowan Avenue this year. So as far as personnel goes, there's the 4 personnel that are paid in the department. Our administrative assistant works 3 days a week, so she's a 0.6 FTE. Currently have 32 or 33 volunteer on call. Our full strength is 42, so we're a little under strength right now. And we're just going through the recruitment process. The 2016 recruit class was 10 members, and we have 6 that are just about to graduate next month. And there's the photo of the membership, current membership. So this is a shot of the last recruit class graduation. So out of a group of about 8 folks, these are the ones that made it through. And 3 of those remain with us at this point. As far as facilities and apparatus goes, we are working out of the main fire station at 160 Jensen Avenue West, just a block away from here. And we have a training site at 1159 Franklin Skull Road, where we are currently just preparing to put up our training tower. We have 2 frontline main pump trucks. We have a rescue pumper. We have a tender, water tender, an aerial ladder truck, special operations trailer, and 3 utility vehicles. Additionally to that, we have a couple of historic units. One is a trailer pump that's stored at the museum, and the other is our number 2 pump, which is the first motorized fire pump we had in Parksville, and it is currently being stored at the Arrington number 1 fire hall. As far as
Could you stop there
operations,
just for a moment? You want to go back to that last slide?
Yep.
In our report, it has, as the fire protection area infills with steady growth, the need to expand facility space to accommodate staff and equipment will become more and more of a priority. So the future, when I looked at this report, the future looks like more and more of a little bit of everything. We had the Insight presentation tonight, read your report. So we're into budget deliberations, and this is going to be important. Continue, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Your Worship, you're correct. We're seeing steady, moderate growth here, and with that growth comes steady increase in our call volumes and the requirements for pumping capacity and the number of volunteers we have. And depending on where things go and what happens in the future, we'll have to consider the pressure on our facilities and those sorts of things.
I have to tell you that in the transition went well.
Yes.
I hope you got rid of all that Boston Bruin paraphernalia and burned it in a fire drill. Sorry,
He's sitting behind me, isn't he?
I didn't see you. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yes, the transition went well, and the Boston Bruins paraphernalia has been taken care of appropriately. So into operations, like I mentioned, we did 520 calls for service last year, which was the highest we've seen ever. And this is the 10-year calls for service. And you can see it goes up and down every year, and it's tough to tell what it's going to do this year. I anticipate that, you know, we may not be at 520, but we'll probably be not far off. So we're seeing a steady increase in calls over the 10 years. It's been an increase average of 15 per year, just steadily. And that comes with things like fire alarm calls, auto accidents. The more buildings and occupancies we get, the more alarms we get. Just the more people we have and the more structures we have, the more incidences we have. So this is a comparison of between 2016 and 2015, and just sort of how it looks for the distribution of calls on a monthly basis. You can see there's some months where we're higher in previous years, but generally it just steadily increases a little bit. This is the distribution of calls that we had in terms of the type of call. And this is a comparison between 2016 and 2015. And you can see that our alarms went up quite a bit. When construction starts to happen in the area, it seems that our alarms go up. So as they're bringing new buildings online, we have a significant increase in alarms that are not caused by fires. So we have a program that we're implementing to educate regarding alarms, so that hopefully we can reduce the number of alarms, thereby reducing the pressure on the volunteers for responding to those. Burning complaints were up. Our medical calls were down slightly. Motor vehicle incidences were up slightly. Our rescue and extrication calls doubled. So that's where we're doing, most of that is automobile rescue. So up on the highway, we did, because of the weather we had in the later fall this past year, we were up on the highway quite a bit doing auto rescue.
Anybody has any questions, join in, because I have a question. With the motor vehicle incidents and the medical first responder, are we getting reimbursed for that when it's not within the city limits?
In terms of, so when we go up on the highway, most of the highway we cover from exit 46 at the weigh scales up to East Morningstar Creek, so about halfway from Buckerfields to the French Creek Bridge. And most of that area we do receive PEP reimbursement when we go up there. So there is some revenue in that regard, although it's not for a very nice reason. The little stretch between exit 46 at the weigh scales and the Englishman River Bridge is actually within the city, so we don't receive any reimbursement for that.
Could we make a case for AVICC or FCM where we could get more money for that type of work that we do?
It's a pretty standard rate all the way across the province. We actually cover that area for Arrington Fire Rescue. They don't have rescue tools, so we're covering that area by agreement on their behalf. So it might be something to explore, but that's a fairly standardized rate through Emergency Management British Columbia, and I think it would be an uphill battle on that one. They do revise the rate each year. Any other questions about the... So here's the responses by zone. So you can see that by far the City of Parksville, with almost 70% of the call volume is in the City of Parksville. And so the contract areas in the regional district, we do about 20% of the calls. So that's French Creek and the local areas, which include Saint-Perel and Forno Road, those areas. And where it says outside the fire protection area, those would be responses where we are assisting another fire department generally. So the responses where we go to Arrington to do the auto rescue, or where we go to Qualicum or Coombs for automatic or mutual aid under our mutual aid agreements. So we are constantly backing each other up across our boundaries. And that system works very well. We actually have a very robust mutual and automatic aid agreement in this area, one of the better ones, I think, in the province. And it works very well, not only for us, because we have bigger structures here, and when we need more resources, we can count on them from our neighbors, but we also go to help them when they are shorthanded. This is particularly comes into play during the day when volunteers are at work, and we may be short-staffed or they may be short-staffed. And this just shows a breakdown of that 11% where we're going. We're going into Arrington most of the time. Again, that's the auto rescue. Qualcomm Beach is the second most often. Dashwood, Coombs, and Anus. Basically, those are our immediate neighbors. So response times, over the 520 calls, our average dispatch time is 1.2 minutes. So that's the time from the call being received to the time the dispatchers in Campbell River page us out. So that's the average time it takes there. Our average muster time from that point is 3.5 minutes or so. So that's until there's enough crew to get the first apparatus out the door. And our average en route time is just over 4 minutes. The average en route time can be a little bit deceiving because the duty officer goes first. So that would be typically the first person leaving. So then it's the average response time of 7.82 minutes. So that's the first person, usually the duty officer, arriving on scene. And then where it says second vehicle on scene, that's typically the staffed fire engine or whichever unit is required, the first unit, and that's around 9.5 minutes. So from the time the person phones 911 to the time we have a fire crew on scene, the average response time is 9.5 minutes. So co-occurring calls, which is something that happens a little bit more often these days. We had 10 last year where we had 2 or more incidents happening at one time. So there was 10 occurrences, and that fluctuates a little bit depending on what's going on, but we're just generally with the increasing call volumes, that's happening more and more often too, which puts a little bit of stress on the members and also causes us sometimes to use that mutual aid from other departments in order to have, if we are already committed to one incident, we will call in a neighboring department to help us with another one. As far as fire loss totals go, in 2016 we had 17 significant dollar loss fires for estimated dollar loss of 1.2 million and an estimated save of just under 5 million. So for a year where we saw an increase in the amount of fires we responded to, the dollar loss was actually fairly low in the big scheme of things. Yeah, the structure fires last year doubled, but they were relatively, we had 3 or 4 that were fairly significant, and we had, the rest were fairly minor in nature, so smaller fires. And then as far as hours we spent responding to incidents, you can see that over the 520 incidents, we were on scene for 308 hours, and that translates into 1,748 hours of person hours on scene. And that's a fire, that was the Moss Avenue fire just up the road where they're rebuilding the house right now. Moving on to fire prevention. So in 2016, we did 192 inspections compared to, you can see the inspections the year before, 287 were done. One of the impacts that happens with the increase in call volume is that the staff in the office end up going to deal with those emergency responses, and that takes them away from the other duties that they normally would perform, whether that be organizing training or doing fire inspections. So that has a lot to do with why those numbers are down. Public fire and life safety education, we did 28 events last year. another 568 person hours, and we estimate that we reached about 783 citizens directly through those education programs. Most of that is done by the volunteer members, coordinated by the assistant chief. And then we had 15 fires last year that we were required to investigate. So we spent time. Fire investigation generally takes between 1 and 3 days to complete, and the follow-up on it can take weeks or months sometimes, depending on what the type of the fire is. Training. Training is the area where we spend the majority of our time, and it allows us to we have a very well-trained fire department here, and I think that shows when the members go out and do the work. In order to be competent and to have those people up to speed, there are several standards, like the certificates we handed out earlier tonight, that we have to meet. So in 2016, our total person hours of training were 8,979, so just under 9,000 hours. So that is a tremendous amount of hours. There's quite a significant increase from the year before because we added some training. We added 3 significant training courses last year. We also have, in anticipation of our new aerial apparatus being a tandem rear axle truck, we have driver training going on right now that we don't normally have going on, so for Class 3 licensing. So all these things have combined to add another significant, just over 2,000 hours of training to our time.
That figure that's jumped up to almost 9,000 training hours, I gather the impact of that too is having to recruit new firefighters every year, and they have to be more and more training that's required.
I'm not sure that we're going to be at that level again at the end of this year. I would expect that to recede a little bit. I don't think it'll go right back down to where it was, but I think the training time is absolutely one of the pressures we have. It takes hundreds, thousands of hours, and each individual member, most of our members are putting in well over 200 hours. Some are putting in the 400 or 500 hour range per year in order to meet the training standards and the requirements. Our city we're sort of in that in-between area. We're not a tiny little place and we're not a big, huge place, but we have to provide the services that are provided in any big city. That's what the expectation is, and that's what we're trying to accomplish. At the end of the day, we'd like to be able to help the people when they call us. So there are certain standards that we can't, that we have to meet. So you can see the comparison, it's climbing steadily. So just in conclusion, I'd like to say we still have a highly effective fire rescue organization. We have a very dedicated and motivated group of volunteer, on-call, and paid staff. We're seeing steady, moderate growth. With that, we're seeing more calls for service and more pressure on our volunteer staff, particularly during the day. And challenges in the future, recruiting and retention is a huge challenge. The face of volunteerism is changing a little bit. The amount of spare time people have and the sheer requirements for training and things like that, it's not the same as it was 27 years ago when I joined. You went down to the fire hall and all we did was Monday night practice and the odd thing here and there. Now we have a very structured program that takes into account these other hundreds and hundreds of hours of training that we do outside of our regular Monday night session, which is happening tonight. That's putting some pressure on facilities, and just in closing, I'd like to thank all our staff. They do a great job in the support of our community and responding to emergencies. Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to echo the last sentence in your report here on page 16. The City of Parksville is truly fortunate to have this incredible group of people whose diversity, commitment, skills, and dedication form the backbone of the fire and rescue service delivery to our community. That's very well said, very true.
Thank you.
Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very, very much, Chief Norris, for the report and for all the work that the department does. I just had a question with regards to training. I'm thinking about the increased awareness and coverage of PTSD and the effect of trauma on first responders. And is this something that's also being incorporated into some of the training, or
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. PTSD is a major concern for us. The reality is that a lot of the things that we're faced with out there doing medical calls or some of the rescue calls that we do are not nice, and you cannot unsee things once you've seen them. The fire department takes very seriously post-traumatic stress, and we go to many lengths to make sure that our people have the support they need, not only through the city's Employee Family Assistance Program, but we have a network for debriefing our members. We start internally, and then we have a network beyond that we can use to ensure that they have, we can debrief after traumatic calls. And then beyond that, also watch our members and watch their mental health and provide services for them if they need some help with that. I know over years you can also, those small traumas can have a cumulative effect on you, and people at some point, I've known members that have just said, I'm not going to do that kind of call anymore because they just, one day they just woke up and had enough. So that is something that we have to be conscious of, because it can affect people.
Yes, first off, thank you to you and all the fire department for everything you do. It truly is appreciated. I want to also thank you for the invitation to go to your banquet on March the 11th. It was truly a privilege to be in the room with all those heroes. So thank you for that. It was good. I cannot thank you enough. I don't have the words to express the gratitude that we feel for the service that you provide. Our worst day is when you guys are at your finest, and anything we can do to support you, we're there for it. I do have one question, though. Is there an issue with false alarms?
Yeah, there's always an issue with false alarms. It is something that we are continuously, through our fire prevention program, trying to wrestle with and trying to educate building owners, especially public buildings. So those are buildings anywhere that a business is, multi-story building, multi-residential, because that's where we get those alarms during construction. So we work with the bylaw department on the nuisance alarm bylaw. We're working with the fire prevention officer to go out and educate people, and we follow up after the false alarms to see if we can use a little bit of education to help reduce the amount of alarms we see. Unfortunately, in multi-residential buildings, if someone burns their toast and they open the door to the hallway instead of the window or the door to the balcony, we're going to get an alarm. And we have to treat it like it's the real thing. We have had them in the past where the alarm goes off and you think, just another alarm, and you get there and there's a fire. So, while the majority of them aren't that way, we have to take them seriously. So, when it comes in as an alarm, we need to think that the alarm is doing its job, and normally the alarm is doing its job. It's just a human has maybe forgotten how it works.
Did I call the vote, Mrs. Gomez? No. I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? And I'm going to declare myself out of order for the next comment, but I was looking at my notes in your report, and it said, doesn't look like Boston's going to make the playoffs. I'm out of order. I take that back. Okay, next report. Chief Norris, would you please give us the background on the issue regarding the Parksville Volunteer Fire Department 2017 update? I need a mover and a seconder to the report be received. Moved by Councillor Salter, seconded by Councillor Beale. So we also have a report on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so this report is just a quick update in 2017 where we're at so far. So here's our calls for service up to yesterday. So you can see that we are trending just right along with last year. A couple calls down. I'm not sure that we're going to make it to the end of the month. We were very busy last March, but we'll see. So you can see that we're at 30 calls for the month of March, which is 2 less than this time last year. And last year we did 46 in March. So total through to date from January is 95. Just an overview of our where the time is being spent by our members. We're at 21 hours of committee meetings. The committee meetings is like our Occupational Health and Safety Committee, Equipment Committee, SCBA Committee, and various other operational committees that we have. Training, monthly meetings, we're already at just under 2,500 hours. And equipment and facility maintenance, that is mainly our Sunday morning equipment maintenance. So we have a crew of firefighters that come in every Sunday morning and pre-trip all the trucks and check every piece of equipment on every truck to make sure that it's functioning properly. And so far they put 132 person hours into that. So we're at about 2,600 hours in that regard so far this year. Fire prevention, we've done 40 inspections. I've had 6 public education events, and we've done 1 fire investigation so far this year. And so just some highlights, some updates. Winter weather was a factor for us late in the fall and early this year. We saw a little more snow, a few more snow events than normal, and this kept us busy with lines down, MBIs, extrications, all those sorts of things. We're busy doing our Class 3 driver's license training program right now. We've had 5 members successfully through. I think Thursday this week we have 5 more going to get tested in Nanaimo. And we're targeting to have a total of 20 completed by the end of the year. 2016 recruit class is nearing their graduation next month, and we just have interviewed for 2017. It looks like we have 10 vacant spots right now, and it looks like we have 8 candidates. So we don't actually have enough to fill all our spots at the moment. We had our annual appreciation banquet on March 11th. I know the members very much appreciate the city's recognition there, and they had a good time. We also had an incident right in the middle of that, and so our duty crew had to get up and go deal with that. We had just participated. Qualicum Beach Fire Rescue holds a youth fire camp every other year, and we host that group for a day. So last Wednesday, we hosted that group down at our training ground for a day and put them through high-rise drills and high-rise firefighting drills and auto extrication drills, and they enjoyed themselves. I'm pleased to say that our training structure is being constructed in Abbotsford right now, and hopefully within the next couple of months that'll be on the ground here and up, and we can have council down to cut the ribbon on that, as it were. Our aerial replacement, I'm working on that right now, trying to get the request for proposal together so we can send that out to the different contractors for bid. And the last thing that I'll be working on as a priority this year will be the hiring of our budgeted fire department assistant. And last but not least, I know there's a lot being made of the Canada 150. It's very important, but I think a very close second in importance is the 75th anniversary of the Parksville Volunteer Fire Department this year, which was established in 1942. The logo you see in front of you was created by one of our members, and I'm happy to say that on July the 22nd, we are going to be hosting a show and shine and an open house at the fire hall. So at the fire station and in this green space between the City Hall and the fire station, we're going to have a big show and shine there. So we're hoping to, and that'll be advertised shortly, as well as invitations will be going out to council for that.
Is this going to turn into some sort of a logo or a pin that...
As a matter of fact, we have some pins and some challenge coins on the way and some various other items. And so as soon as we have those things available, we'll...
And you'll be celebrating this in the Canada Day Parade, I hope.
Absolutely. So it's our intention throughout the year to not only to have this sort of main event, we're calling it, on July 22nd, but also during all our other events through the year, Canada Day, our charitable fundraisers, the show and shines that we take and put our old truck in, those sorts of things. We're hoping to just have a banner up, and we're going to have some historical information there so everybody can learn about the history of the fire department.
I gather, somebody from staff, I gather we're going to be doing some publicity about this also? Okay, great. All kidding aside, it was a great transition. We were left with a pretty good legacy, even though the hockey thing, you're not a very good judge, but that's another story. All in all, it was pretty good. Okay. Any questions for, yes, Councillor Beal?
Thank you, and thank you very much. I was curious with the training tower that's being constructed. Is that pleased to hear that it's coming along, and is that time frame what was expected? Is it pretty much on track?
Yeah, we're a little bit behind on our timeline, but I anticipate that it should be on the ground and here in Parksville by June. And we should be in good shape to use it all through the summer and beyond.
Any further questions for Chief Norris? Seeing none, I'm going to call for a vote that it's to receive. All those in favor? Thank you once again. Really appreciate it. Okay, the next item we have is Mr. Figuera. I need a mover and a seconder for the adoption of the Transportation Master Plan update of 2016. Do I have a mover, Councillor Burden? Do I have a seconder? Councillor Patterson. Okay. Mr. Figuera.
Just trying to get organized here. So in front of you, you'll have a copy of the slideshow that I've provided there. Also, as part of your package, I understand you received a copy of the Master Transportation Plan, the final version, and also along with that final version, there was unfortunately the figures 1 through 14 came out pretty tiny. I apologize for that, but I've also distributed to you blow-ups of those figures 1 through 14. So, So before council is a report to obtain council direction to adopt the Transportation Master Plan Update 2016 dated December the 19th. That's the version you have. The update is a result of extensive public engagement and feedback since 2008, as a matter of fact. So it's been a long time coming. And this feedback has all been used in creation of the final document that's in front of you. So what I thought I'd do is go through a few slides. The first one is going to show you kind of the magnitude of the public feedback that was received and used in creation of the final document. And then there's a number of slides that follow that talk about the latest open house and what public's opinion is of the document. And I think that would give you a good idea of what the public thinks and the direction that they wanted us to go with this, and how the Master Transportation Plan sort of meets their needs. So this first slide, it's a chronological accounting of all the public feedback that has happened. So there was in June of 2009, there was the first open house that occurred. As you can see, in the tan color there, that's just the total number of attendees, and in blue represents the written feedback that was received. So in June 2009, there was in the order of 100 participants that provided just in the neighborhood of 40 pieces of feedback that was used. And then in that same month of 2009, there was a walkabout that's referred to in the documents, and those open houses and materials that came out of those open houses are in the appendix of the master plan document. But then in November of the same year, changes were made as a result of the first open house. In November, the second version was presented and in open house number 2, and it was very well attended. As you can see, close to 600 attendees, 200 of which gave us written feedback. At that particular open house, the transportation went off the rails slightly because of various opinions on the content, and so that's part of the explanation for the large delay till 2016 and the open house we had, number 3. Some of the factors were between 2009 and 2016, we also had an OCP update, and once it came around to trying to resolve some of the issues in 2009, it made sense to wait for the OCP update, because the OCP drives everything, and bringing in a master transportation plan just prior to an OCP update doesn't really make a lot of sense. So the OCP came in, I believe that was 2013, Blaine, is that right? And then since then, one of the issues that ran the second open house off the rails slightly was the opinions on Jensen Avenue and what it would be. Would it be an actual road connection, and what would it look like? So part of the resolution to that was once the OCP was updated, we made significant efforts to resolve what makes sense for Jensen, and it turned out, as part of the Corefield upgrade, that the public really got behind a Jensen Greenway. Not a vehicular connection, but an actual bikeway, pedestrian way. So that resolved kind of any sort of questions or differences of opinion that were raised in 2009. So then we felt we could go forward and successfully complete the master transportation plan. So the slides that follow now reflect the public's opinion of the document as it exists now before you, and I'll just continue on to those. So this isn't an exhaustive compilation of all of the remarks we received, but anything that was graphable, we did so, just to kind of give you a sense as to what the public thought. So in terms of the transportation modes, they were ranked based upon the level of importance. So the legend in the lower left-hand corner, least important is red, important is yellow, and most important is blue. So those particular transportation modes that are favoring or dominant by yellow and blue are the ones really to look out for to try to understand where the public's coming from. And what you can see there is that the bottom two, pedestrian and bicycle, there was fairly good agreement that those were quite important to the public. A little less so with transit, just above those two. A little less discernible that that's agreeable.
By transit, you mean public transit?
Yes, I do.
That proves to me that we love our cars.
We love our cars, yeah. Well, or potentially bicycles and pedestrian facilities as well here. So road network, it does appear as though that is still thought to be significant, but certainly what stands out here is the agreement on the bicycles and pedestrians.
Councillor Burton.
Just a comment on the bicycle and pedestrian importance as it's graphed. I guess there's really no way of measuring for lobby groups, eh?
Measuring for lobby groups?
Well, I noticed when I was at the December meeting, there was a significant group of folks that were promoting bicycle transportation. And I don't want to mitigate or minimize the importance of those things, but I'm just wondering, the mayor said it, we love our cars. And I'm wondering if there was any way of measuring.
There is, if I may, Your Worship, there is some reference to that in the last slide. It gives you a sense as to how many respondents were from residents from Parksville, how many of them were businesses, and how many of them were not from Parksville at all. So it gives you a little bit more sense. You're right, though. It is to tell the way it was set up, to tell exactly which comment came from somebody that lives in Parksville or does not live in Parksville. It's hard to kind of nail it down, just the way the surveys, there's some just limitations of surveys, but in general, you'll see the last slide kind of gives you a sense as to, you know, is it this community, or what's the impact? How many people were commenting from outside the community? So the support, it was put to survey. What's the support for the master transportation plan's emphasis on alternative modes of sustainable transportation? So we consider alternative modes of sustainable transportation being basically alternatives to the car. So we're talking cycling, pedestrian ways. Transit does come into there. But anything that would get you out of a vehicle basically is alternative modes of transportation. So as you can see, significant support for the theme of the master transportation plan being the emphasis on alternative modes. 63% came in with a yes to that inquiry, and the remaining 37% are a no, and some of them give some feedback on that. My report kind of goes into a little bit about the kind of the themes of the type of comments that people were coming back with the no. In terms of so now that we get into support for bicycles and pedestrians, the types of bicycle facilities the respondents felt would be most effective in promoting cycling. And again, we're looking for most important yellow, important is red, and least important is blue. So those sort of facilities that are dominant yellow and red would be the ones to look out for. And so you can see at the far left there, the painted cycling lanes. There's good agreement there that painted cycling lanes are important, are effective. Separated bicycle lanes are identified as being important. Little less agreement on more bike racks or lockers. not as definitive as the other ones, but still, if you add up the red and the yellow, more than the blue. As you proceed to the right, there are signed bicycle routes and multi-use trails. So it seems, the types of conclusions that one could draw from this are support the bike infrastructure and paint those lanes and, look at separated bicycle lanes where possible.
And I'm just thinking that presumably the importance of these different suggestions might depend on the nature of the road or route that one's on. I'm just thinking that, to have that blanket, which would be most important, some of these, it might depend on the road. If you're on a fairly quiet residential road, then having a sign may be fine. And if it was a different sort of road, then one might need something else.
No, that's very good observation there. It basically is, to me, this basically is saying support the bike infrastructure by making sure that it's observable in the field, that it's painted, that it's signed, that there's separate bike lanes. So what this kind of feedback empowers us to do basically is come up with how does Parksville want to mark all of their, certainly marking it is something that the public wants us to do, so that you're in the field or on the street, you can see that you're on a bike route, you can see the sign, it's painted on there's support for bike routes here. But what we can now do is move forward in more detail with our operations group, is to come up with a bicycle network strategy for marking it. Like, how much signage do you use? How much painting are we going to use? What is a painted bike lane going to look like? How often do you put on the stencils with the bike patterns, and what can we support with our resources? This allows us to put emphasis on that and spend resources figuring that out to make sure that we have a standard for Parksville. This is what we do in Parksville for marking out of our bike facilities.
Rhodes?
Thank you, Vaughn. This has been going on since 2009, and in that time you've had 865 people attend the events. That doesn't mean there was 865 individuals. That could have been 200 people coming 4 different times, right?
If I may, Your Worship, through to the councillor. That's true. I mean, these could be some of the same people coming to the different events.
Right. And then the questions, in order to collate the data to present to us here tonight, when you say that X number of people supported this concept, were the same questions being asked in 2009 as were asked in 2016?
There were certainly different kinds of events. Those early events shaped the document as to what it is today. The document was changed and altered based on comments. That was before my time, even here, in 2009. They certainly shaped the document, and it was thought that there's been such a passage of time between then and now, we need to touch bases again with the public and see what they think of the document. There was additional data that was used in 2014 and 15 to make sure that, and the conclusions were tweaked accordingly, just due to the difference in the traffic. But certainly, the document as it sits today, it is reflective of the public input all along. And as it is today, with everyone that attended the latest event in December of 2016, this is a result of, these graphs are a result of their reaction to the document.
65 people attended the event in 2016.
That's right.
And 20 people can provide a comment.
And then there was also the online survey that was also done.
So in total, 74 surveys.
Online survey. Yeah, so there's over 50 online surveys were done, and then the open house in the blue there is the feedback from the open house.
So 74 surveys.
Yeah, okay. So the response as to whether there's currently adequate bicycle facilities available, such as bike lanes, routes, and trails, again, only 14% said yes, which basically says that the general consensus is that people think there isn't enough. There's not enough bike lanes, there's not enough routes, there's not enough trails. That's pretty decisive. The response as to whether there are adequate pedestrian facilities available, such as sidewalks, trails, and crossings. Again, only 25% said yes, so there's only a quarter of the respondents thought that there was enough. Reinforcing again the theme of the Master Transportation Plan and alternate modes of transportation. People want more sidewalks, they want more trails, they want better crossings on the roads, safer crossings. This is just a question we asked in terms of accessibility. We wanted to get an understanding of the respondent or someone else in the household has mobility issues. So 59% gave us a no, and the rest gave us a yes. There's someone in the household. We never got into too much detail on that, but it just reflects the demographic of Parksville. There's a significant number of people that do have mobility issues, and we better be thinking about making sure that whatever we build assists them with accessing facilities and services. This is an interesting one. The Master Transportation Plan, as many modern transportation plans do, they are addressing the zero-emission vehicle zones, neighborhood zero-emission vehicle zones. And these are basically, I would call them, I guess, glorified kind of golf carts, but certainly not the vehicles that can't really go over 40 kilometers an hour. They're designed to go 40 or less. And so it does require that wherever that zone is, within the zone, that there's a maximum posting of 40 kilometers an hour. There was a 60% agreement that no, we don't really want to entertain this in Parksville. And but the Master Transportation Plan did leave it in because it's something that transportation consultants feel is significant for some communities. And that's why we asked the question for our community: is this something that people want to entertain or not? And it appears as though it's not.
Back to my earlier point about the motivation of people to respond to the surveys and make comment. We want to walk and we want to ride bicycles, and I do too. But we don't want to slow down, and we don't want to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by not driving our vehicles at 50, 60, 70 kilometers an hour down 1980. So just an observation.
This one was to get a sense too, is we wanted to understand the agreement that the configuration of the regional district Nanaimo section of Highway 19A, that's between the Orange Bridge and Greek Road, on the other side of the Orange Bridge. We want to get an understanding, is that a significant barrier in people's minds? And speaking mainly to the pedestrian and excuse me? Pedestrians. Oh, sorry about that. Anyways, I think that's a new word. Pedestrians? It's a good question. Okay, so we wanted to get an understanding if since we have a community that feels that alternative modes are important, and that pedestrian facility and bicycle facility is important. We do have a section of road that is not under our control, that basically separates two parts of the city, the resort industrial area from the rest of the city. We wanted to get an understanding, is that a concern for people? Is it something they think is important to do something about? And from what we can see here, from a vehicular standpoint, it doesn't seem like there's much concern that that's a barrier, which actually plays out in the data. We don't anticipate that section of road is going to need to have 4 lanes for a very long time. But so from a vehicular standpoint, it's not bad. But in terms of trying to get pedestrians and cyclists through that corridor from the resort area into Parksville, huge safety issues. And it looks like the public also feels as though that it's a barrier to pedestrians and cyclists. So that kind of reaffirmed that that yes, this is good. This is good reinforcement. Yeah, that we are expending our energies in the areas where we should be. And in terms of this issue, we're working with the RDN right now to try to address that corridor. Of course, to the RDN and the ministry. The ministry actually are responsible for the roads, but we are working with them right now, and there seems to be an air of cooperation going on. So we will continue to work with them and expend our resources to try to make a difference for the community in terms of pedestrians and cycling facilities on 19A in that section of road. The Master Transportation Plan also does identify capital projects and a short and kind of long-term schedule. And all of our master plans, we require that some of the output of those plans feeds into our capital program. So by supporting the document as it is today, we will then take those capital projects and start feeding them into our capital program. So this was just to kind of get an idea from the public, is there support in their minds to the projects that have been identified in the Master Transportation Plan? And the majority of the projects are promoting bicycles and pedestrians in the theme of the transportation plan. There was analysis done of major road links, and at the end of the day, the conclusion was that in terms of major road links, the recommendation was that no major road links, at least in this plan, in the foreseeable future until it's updated again. There doesn't seem to be any the benefit to expending resources on more major road links. Certainly upgrades to existing roads, but no major new road links. And that seems to be what we're seeing here.
Depending on where this goes, this master plan with all the projects on it, that would be integrated into the long, short, medium, and long term, and get some timing on it. So have we prioritized? I know that this council has asked for traffic calming on 19A, and that's a priority, but have we prioritized?
It certainly shows up in the master transportation plan. It does speak to a time frame for putting bike lanes on the highway and expanding the two-lane section of highway west of downtown there. Talks about that and time frame. So it certainly gives a mandate that those are important projects, and puts us into the next. I know council has indicated that is an important.
I did have an interesting comment from someone who lives on Temple, where we've now installed bicycle lanes on both sides and there's no parking. This person has a home-based business, and the person has said to me, I'm going to have to move because I need people to come to my house. If I don't have enough parking space in my driveway, they can't park. They'd have to park a long way away before they can get to my house. So that's interesting, and that's something that I don't know how many home-based businesses there are. Would you know that, Councillor Burton?
I don't know it off the top of my head, but I do have the number, and there are quite a few, and I know of the complaint which you speak.
Okay, so that's an interesting observation, and I've said, well, you know, the name of the game is to walking and pedestrianization, cycling, and all that. So yeah, I didn't get any. Yeah, go ahead.
Your Worship, just to clarify, the business license bylaw for home-based businesses requires all parking to be on the property, not on the street.
I'll talk to that person.
No, that's.
But I know that the bicycle lanes came after the fact.
Right.
When they moved into that home-based business. Okay, it continues.
No, and to echo that, I mean there are certain limitations of a residential neighborhood to accommodate parking of business vehicles. Really, it can't be expected that, depending on the business, that there should be, as the CAO has indicated, there should be accommodation on the lot for parking of trucks or whatever the business is. There should be accommodation there by the business. Anyway, so here's that last slide that I was speaking about. So, in terms of Parksville residents and business owners, we're over 80% of the respondents were either residents of Parksville or business owners, business operators in Parksville. So that's pretty cool. That means we're getting a good sense from the residents of Parksville, the taxpayers of Parksville, of what they want and their opinion of the master transportation plan and its emphasis on alternative modes of transportation. As you can see on the right there, yeah, the remainder is they were not residents of Parksville. So there you have it. So I'm open to questions, but I'll just say first, staff feel that the Master Transportation Plan Update 2016, dated December 19th, reflects the community's desires and needs regarding transportation infrastructure. I think the document's ready to guide the development of transportation infrastructure and policies over the next 20 years, or until the Master Transportation Plan is renewed again. But that's what the intent is, and my recommendations are as per the report.
To comment before I ask for questions from members of council, this plan, like any other that we have, our infrastructure replacement renewal program, is subject to priorities changing and that sort of thing, depending on the state of the nation with regards to budgets and what have you.
That's right.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Figuera from members of council? Okay, I'm going to start around. I'll go with Councillor Burton, Councillor Salter, and then Councillor Beale, and I'll continue.
So not so much questions as comments. Glad to see this odyssey come to an end. If I could maybe you could make a note that we would never, ever, ever again in a transportation plan see reference to a bridge at Despard and Englishman River. That we'd never again see any reference to Despard going through the sensitive wetland areas of the Ermineskin lands. I know why they're in there, and I get it. It's okay. I'm glad to see them not being put into any kind of a capital plan, but I just seems to be a waste to even think about another exchange at Church Road or any of those things. It's just a waste of effort. I really am pleased to see the movement of bicycles away from 19A between Martindale and Molliette. I think that's a smart move. Even if we want to do traffic calming in that area, I think it's just a general danger to have a mix of bicycles and particularly large vehicles on that route. Overall, I think it's a good plan. I like the progression of capital projects through. I likely won't see the end of them. It seems to go a long way into the future, but that's good. So I'll certainly be supporting the adoption of the Transportation Master Plan. Thanks.
Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, just a couple things. One is, I just want to toss out there sidewalks. I know that there was some talk about high visibility sidewalks, and I have to say, in Nanaimo down on Commercial, they have some really fun, actually very visible sidewalks. You can't miss that it's a sidewalk. Do we have anything like that in place? I didn't see anything in the document, but...
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Salter, what sort of, is it a particular product you're thinking of, like a high visibility sidewalk?
Yeah, so down in Nanaimo, they're painted.
They're painted.
Yeah, so they're just painted, just an array of they're very colorful. And so you just don't miss them because they're so different from the rest of the pavement.
Right.
So they're quite high visible, yeah.
Yeah, we're starting to look at using color, and certainly regarding the bike facilities and certainly some of the pedestrian facilities where we have potential conflicts with turning vehicles.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking of right down here on the highway, right off Corfield and the highway, right. Both of those.
Right.
Those sidewalks have been, actually, there's been some fatalities there, but maybe the high visibility, and that's one.
Right.
And then my other thing that I wanted to toss out there is with regard to the bike lanes on both sides of the road. And I wonder why we need to have it on both sides. I see that we're trying to densify. So if we're promoting high density and smaller lots, and it seems that we seem to be constantly, there's constantly changes coming to the lot sizes and so on, and we're supporting that because we're agreeing with this densification. We're going to reach a point where people won't be able to park their vehicles in their driveways because they just won't have the room. And then you have company over, and all of a sudden, what do you do with your vehicle?
Right.
So I kind of think that we're sort of fighting ourselves by doing this. A bike lane somewhere would be okay, but there's got to be parking available for folks as well. And on Temple, there is not. The only available parking is in the driveway.
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Salter, there is a struggle with the demand between parking and bike lanes. There's different treatments that we're looking at, or continually looking at, to try to accommodate both of those uses together. It is tricky because of door swing and whatnot, but some communities have chosen to make wherever there's parking lanes, there's a wider bike lane in the road to accommodate the door swing, so that and a painted sort of separation between the parking lanes and the bike lanes. When you have the luxury of a wide right-of-way where you can fit that in, it's definitely something worth looking at to stop the conflict. But on Temple, the effort there was to provide a main cycling pedestrian corridor that emphasized alternative modes so people could find a safe way for themselves, and if children or accessibility challenged people to try to get into town. We're still working on the connection of that to the downtown. That's in the program, but it is a difficult balance sometimes, and we try to fit parking pockets in. Up Temple, you'll see in places there's parking pockets. It's not continuous parking, obviously, up both sides. There are parking pockets, but we do expect that, for the most part, people that are on those routes, that have frontages on those routes, the expectation is that they make room on their lot for their parking. People have parties, stuff happens, right? Events. Where possible, we try to put parking pockets, and certainly where there's mailbox, super boxes and stuff, we try to fit them in. But it is a competing use. There are ways to try to accommodate both of them. We're looking for a solution for Parksville that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just think simple. I hear the door swing, but in fact, if you had the bike lane on one side only and the other side was available for parking, there wouldn't be any door swing problems, and bicycles would be able to come and go as they chose on one side of the road, and yet the other side would be available for parking.
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Salter, there are complications with having bike lanes on the road on one side only. You'll have potentially, depending how wide they are, some conflict between cyclists going in either direction at one another, potentially clipping handlebars with each other. There's also, when you're cycling on one side of the road and you want to make a left turn, say it's on the right-hand side of the road, you want to make a left turn, it's tricky and difficult to make it safe for people to get into an intersection and turn if everything's on one side. Now, if you have a separation, potentially an elevated multi-use trail on one side, that makes a bit more sense. There's a bit more safety there, a bit more distance between the traffic, but then you still have this issue of how do you tie in those sorts of facilities at intersections when people are going in all different directions. It makes it, people are going to take a chance. We can say that, you have to get off your bicycle at the intersection if you want to, and walk across the street to get on the bike trail that's on the intersecting road, but it makes it challenging. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it makes it very challenging, and safety issues then become paramount when trying to figure that out.
Okay, Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Worship. I do think there are a lot of positives in this transportation plan. I do have some questions and I'm curious as well, although it is the master plan, is it perceived or anticipated that there is some flexibility in how specifics are addressed over time, and that also, considering that it's meant to be a document that would guide for 20 years, that's quite a long time, is there flexibility in this, not only in terms of implementation priorities, but making minor upgrades or responding to new information that comes along?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Bill. Absolutely. It's these master documents, and specifically the Master Transportation Plan, these are recommendations by a consultant as to what would work here. We have to then take this document and interpret it as staff and of course, council. We'll give you our recommendations on what we think is doable here in Parksville. For example, the net zero emission zone. It is a suggestion in the master transportation plan, but the public seem to be, so far, the feedback we're getting, fairly clear that we don't want to be doing that here. These are guides that we use to try to make sure that the policies we bring in, the decisions we make, are abiding by the wishes and needs of the public, but also we have to run it through our own experience here as staff and give you recommendations as to the how to interpret it.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to know if we've got some flexibility there, because if I'm signing on to something, if it's like a contract, it'd be a little different. So a couple of questions. On page 2 and 3, and I quote, this document, I note, where is it, page 2 and 3? Oh, just right near the bottom, that, no, that's not page. Study found that reducing, is that the right one? That there was a study found that reducing the, I think there must be more than one page 2 and 3. That's the problem. We've got a page 1.
Yeah,
We've
there's
got
E2
page
and
1.
3.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Page 2 out of the 2.0 background.
Right, okay.
That's it, okay. That at the bottom, the 2014 Highway 19A urbanization study reviewed feasibility of reducing the number of through lanes from 4 to 2 lanes between the Englishman River Bridge and McMillan Road, et cetera. The study found that reducing the number of lanes on the highway was not recommended, and I certainly support that conclusion. I would not recommend anything otherwise. What I didn't see in here, but I really may have missed it, is I did not see any recommendation, though. There's no mention of the possibility of reducing lane widths with the downgrading of 19A from highway to an urban arterial. And I was curious as well, I think on page 9 it talks about urban arterial width being 3.3 meters, and I honestly don't know what the width of the lanes is on 19A, and here I'd say east of the Alberni Highway, because I also get the feeling that it may be a little bit tighter between Alberni and McMillan, but I don't know for sure there.
Yeah,
so,
if I may, Your Worship, through Councillor Beale. Yeah, what it does do is it does refer to projects that that address upgrades on the highway, and certainly what you're talking about, there was a recent study done by the same consultant that talked about circulation in and around downtown, and that's how we came to the conclusion that Jensen Greenway should be a pedestrian way. And some of the recommendations there, that's I would consider that like a more specific recommendation that often comes out of master transportation plans. So in concentrating now on that section of roadway, we did have a presentation by a consultant already on that section that suggested reducing the lane widths would be an effective way to potentially consider putting bike lanes in there and wider sidewalks. So that's definitely where we're going with what Council has given me in terms of priority after this master transportation plan, is to start looking at that.
So follow-up. So that is in fact in here some way, because, and a little bit of a nod to my fellow councillor, Councillor Burden, who does not want a bicycle along 19A, and I understand that, and I don't think anybody who doesn't want to do that shouldn't have to do that. But if in fact those lanes were reduced in width, it might allow for let's say a shoulder designation, which would still make it a little safer for those cyclists who do want to go along there or who have business along highway, because I do regularly see people who bicycle on the sidewalk along 19A, and that can be a problem. And I do see people going to various stores with their bicycles, and they're on 19A, and so they need to be able to get there somehow if they have that sort of business. So I just wasn't sure that I was seeing it in the document. The references that I saw to 19A were very specific, I thought, between the bridge and Shelley Road or some other things. But I'm encouraged, I think, by your response that that in fact may be something that could come about over time.
Yeah, my expectation is that I'll be bringing to council what it would entail us taking a good look at that in terms of what sort of process I recommend that we should follow in terms of addressing that section of road next to downtown. And it's going to involve looking at what's involved in narrowing the lanes and what's involved with, but I have to come to council. There's no real, it hasn't been identified any money for that yet, but that'll be coming.
I just want to remind councillors that, when these things come forward, there'll be plenty of time to discuss the individual projects. So let's not get into the design and tonight.
I understand that. I just didn't recall seeing any reference to that, and yet there were a number of other references to specifics, and some of which, really looked great. On page 24, I was pleased I'd just like to say, referring to page 32 and 33 with the pedestrian area, was very nice to see the reference to the importance of signage and wayfinding, and some very nice examples there as well for people, whether they be local residents or visitors, not being sure if a pathway is a public pathway or public access or would something lead somewhere. And I'll come back to that. And I was also just curious if over time, with regards to things like traffic counts, is there ever any consideration for acquiring tools that count active transportation, so pedestrians, cyclists, or scooters? It just seems that the counts or the references seem to be around vehicles. And I just wondered, because I understand that there have been tools that are developed now to do that sort of thing.
Right. If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Belia, we're right now we're looking at that sort of technology potentially for downtown. We're looking at prices and everything and seeing how much it would cost. But we have been speaking with with suppliers of that sort of technology, and it's a visual technology, so it's technology that analyzes digital video to identify how many cyclists and how many pedestrians are going down the street. So we're looking at that. Yeah.
I'll try not to be too long.
However, if you're too long.
You know what, though? I got to say this because I don't have to say it, but I'm going to anyway. But I've been trying to go through all these different plans. And then when I got another package, I thought, okay, so how is this one different from the other one that I've got? So I poured through them. I've got my stickies. I've got my notes. This is my chance to ask a few questions, okay? But I do want to say how pleased I was as well to see the references to recommended improvements for transit users that would also improve both comfort and accessibility for people who choose or need to use transit. And it seems that they would synchronize very nicely with the proposals that we put forward here as well.
Right.
Thank you. And if I didn't give you enough time, I apologize. Councillor Oates.
Well, you could have done Alex Trebek and told her to phrase it in the form of a question. I have a question wondering why page 85 and 86 are in an agenda and what that has to do with the transportation master plan.
If I may, Your Worship, I can address that. They have absolutely nothing to do with it. It was a mistake. It was a piece of paper that was sitting underneath.
Interesting reading. I also went through this here, and what I haven't been able to find is anything that speaks to the number of crosswalks and the cross times there. Now, a year ago tomorrow, we passed a motion here that staff would prepare a report on the number of crosswalks and the crosswalk time. I don't think that's contained here in this document, so I'm wondering when we might get that report. To your worship, to whoever can answer.
If I may, Your Worship, that's definitely something we can start getting to now. There's a number of requests that staff are going to be asking for some priority on, and if that's the next highest priority, we can certainly get onto that now that we have the master transportation plan. Hopefully, if council supports it tonight, we can get on to requests like that.
Tell you that in Anaheim, California, in the city of Anaheim, with 8 lanes of traffic, 4 lanes coming and going, the time is 33 seconds. And in the last 10 seconds, there's a countdown, 10, 9, 8. Anyway, just thought I'd mention that. Interesting. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship. I'll keep fairly short. Through you to, I think, our CAO. Towards the end of this document is the capital plans working file. Now, are any of these plans are included in our next 5-year financial plan?
Yes, there are.
And that's so we will have a opportunity for prioritizing?
The capital program are included in the budget, so it's part of the budget discussion.
So I guess my question is, with council, we will decide what we may consider a priority.
That's my understanding.
Yeah. Oh, as you go through the budget process, if you adopt the budget, then you've adopted the capital program.
My final wrap-up comment's very, very short, and it's a comment. It's not a question, or it's a frustration that I've had for a long time. Knowing that this was on the agenda tonight, I walked from Dogwood downtown down to the park and walked back home on the highway, on the sidewalks. And I can tell you that 19A for me, as the mayor and as a citizen, is still the priority. I faced speeding, people coming in another direction on a very narrow sidewalk where you have to sort of dipsy-doodle to make sure you get around. The wide roads, people were traveling at all kinds of speeds, zigging and zagging. And it just becomes, every time I walk it, and I try to do it on a nice day at least once a week, it's horrendous. It really is. I can't understand why there hasn't been more incidents than they've been, and I don't wish that on anybody, believe me. But 19A for me is still a priority in terms of whether we widen the sidewalks and therefore narrow the lanes. The sidewalks could be widened by 3 feet on either side. And so when that issue comes up again, I'll have a lot more to say. But I'm with everybody else. I think it's a great report. It gives us a template for the future, and I'll be supporting it. So on that note, we have a mover and a seconder. On the 2 recommendations that you have before you, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried, and thank you for that effort. Okay, we're moving on to yes, you may be recused. Thank you very much, sir. Don't fall asleep. I'm sure to come back. Okay, this is fairly straightforward. You had the report. You had time to read it. The Community Park Mobile Food Services. Mrs. Keller, would you please give us the background on it? A mover and a seconder for the 3 recommendations. Moved by Councillor Salter, seconded by Councillor Beale.
Did both councillors declare conflict here? Is that what happened? Okay.
I believe so, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is an application for, or consideration of proposals for mobile food concession services in the community park for the 2017 season. Council authorized staff to issue a request for proposals for the occupation of the 2 existing mobile food vending pads in the community park adjacent to the Lions Venture Playground. We received 2 proposals in response to the city's request. and staff is seeking direction from council with respect to entering into an agreement for the provision of mobile food services from May until September of this year. As council is aware, the community park master planning process is currently underway and is expected to provide information for council to consider for subsequent years. So at the moment, we are looking at this season only, although the license of agreement does allow for a one-year extension at the sole discretion of council. Recommendations at this point are to consider the award of the proposal to the Parksville and District Chamber of Commerce, and additional recommendations are per the agenda.
I'd like to note that Councillor Burden and Councillor Patterson left the room, so any questions for Mrs. Kaler? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. Oh, you have a question? Go ahead.
I just want to, yes, I do have a question. There is a recommendation or a request from the PDBA that there be an associate, that there be a requirement that there be an associate member of the PDBA. Now, do we need to, can we add this in some way, or is that separate?
What's the context of that? I don't have that report in front of me. Mrs. Kaler?
If I may, Mr. Mayor, what we had proposed at the staff level was that we would advise the successful bid proposal of that request. We don't believe that it's within our ability to enforce. However, we would notify the individual who is successful that that would be strongly encouraged as part of our agreement.
Okay, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you, that is carried. Would you bring back the other members, please? We're going to have a late night tonight. All right. So this is the, Mrs. Kaler, once again, this is the Spring 2017 grant and aid applications. I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Burden is moving it. Who else was your member? You were the member? Who else was the member?
Councillor Powell.
Oh, so Councillor Beal seconded the motion. And this is not a case of the multiplication of loaves and fishes. This is a Okay. Mrs. Keller, that's pretty straightforward. Did you give us the background very quickly, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendations are outlined in the agenda. As council is aware, there are two intakes for the grants and aid, one being in the spring and the next being in the fall. And as was discussed at the previous meeting, there were a lot of applicants for this particular round. And Councillors Burden and Powell met and recommend the distribution of the monies as outlined in the staff report.
Almost magical. $16,000 required, and we got it down to $2,500. Congratulations. Any questions? I'm going to call the vote. I have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. Okay. Mrs. Kaler, once again, would you please give us the background on the issue of the 2017 Parcel Tax Review Panel, which is fairly straightforward. I need a mover and a seconder for the three recommendations. Moved by Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Burden. Mrs. Kaler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is a request to Council to set the date and time for the Parksville Tax Review Panel to authenticate the 2017 parcel tax rolls for water, sewer, and regional parks as required under the Community Charter. And recommendations are per the agenda. I will just point out that the item number 2 is that the hearing be scheduled for Wednesday, April 19th at 5:45 p.m. in the forum here.
Any questions for Mrs. Kaler? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of the recommendations? Thank you. That is carried. Okay. We have bylaws tonight for the first reading. 5 bylaws for the first reading this evening. They're all listed in your reports. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Burton, seconded by Councillor Beal. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. We have one bylaw for the third reading this evening, and that's the Zoning and Development Amendment Bylaw 2016, number 2000.102. It's the text amendment to the Comprehensive Development CD2 zone to facilitate additional bumper boats and other fairground uses. It's 375 Island Highway West. I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Oates, seconded by Councillor Salter. Any questions? Comments? All those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. New business. I'm going to go around the table. I have some new business, but I'll go last tonight. Councillor Patterson, do you have any new business? No? Councillor Oates? Councillor Beal?
Yes, thank you. I do have one item. I would just like to let anyone who doesn't know about this that there is going to be a community forum put on by the Oceanside Task Force on Homelessness, the Homelessness Task Force. So a community forum, March 30th, the end of this month, from 11:30 to 1:30 p.m. You are invited to be part of the solution. Homelessness today, where could we be tomorrow? It needs to be a community solution. So I invite everyone who can attend to please come. If you have questions, if you have ideas, if you'd like to learn more. There is lunch provided. There is no admission fee, but RSVP is required so that they can plan for lunches. And it's going to be held here at the Parksville Community Center.
Thank you. Councillor Salter, any new business?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I attended the meeting at the museum on March 17th. And just some of the things that are happening. They're going to be visiting museum in Burnaby on the 10th of May. They're also looking at mutually visiting other museums on Vancouver Island, so going up to Port Alberni and Comox, Campbell River, and so on, and then those museums also coming down to Parksville so that they can look at how each other are managing their resources and going into the back room, looking at how their exhibits are placed and so on. They're also creating a new calendar for 2018, and it sounds really quite a fun calendar. They're thinking about possibly creating a punch card for the museums on the Mid-Island, and so each museum holds the punch cards and then would sell it to their community member. But then that community member, if they chose, could go to Campbell River and attend the Campbell River Museum, having already paid in Parksville, and people in Campbell River could come and see the museum in Parksville, having paid in Campbell River. So just, I think a really good idea actually, and probably a good way to have for people to sort of tour on Vancouver Island. They're also looking at working with VIU and DP. The Gaia College, working with landscaping, they're going to do the landscaping, propagating in the gardens, and selling the plants that they propagate as well. They're doing this for free, so it's a really good working partnership. And they're doing the spring cleanup, so that's great. They're also looking at what they're calling fundraising they're thinking about doing fundraising with the city, calling it a fish and chips event. And so they're talking about the city taking the trees and chipping them. And so that's the chips. And then using the chips around the museum in the gardens and so on, and then having chips from I think it's the Bobby restaurant just up the road there, fish and chips place. And they're thinking, they'll pay half and the museum pays half or something. They'll come up with something, but it sounds like a really good idea. And they're also talking about upcycling these old axles that they've got laying around at the museum and turning them into benches. sounds like fun. So they've just got a lot going on. They're working really hard. They did a Brant decoy article with Jill Davies, and they focused on the Brant collection that they have because that's sort of coming up. They're looking at creating a Canada 150 time capsule and engaging the community with that, so seniors and youth. And they're going to be having a soft opening on the 15th, and certainly May, sorry. And anyone that would like to join the museum, they're always open to memberships. And that's my report.
Very much. That reminded me, Mrs. Comas, tomorrow you and I have to set a date with Mr. Dembicki to meet with they want to talk about some of the trees. This is the same people, eh?
No,
This is the
Heritage.
We'll meet tomorrow. Okay, sorry,
That's
I'm
the
off.
Community garden, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's your other committee. I got confused. Okay, Councillor Burton. I do get confused from time to time.
Thank you. I had the pleasure of making some introductory remarks at the opening of the Health and Wellness Fair held on Saturday at the Community Center. And it tied in nicely with my work that I do with the Perfect Storm Group, which is the other side of the health ledger, where if we pay a little bit more attention to what the health and wellness folks are doing, then maybe we won't need the services of the physicians quite as much. Obviously, they're still important in our community, and we have to continue that work. And many of you, this side of the table, will have received an email inviting you to become part of the Big Bike team on May the 24th, and I would encourage you all to go to the website indicated, make a small donation, and join and take one of the 29 seats on the Big Bike in support of the Heart and Stroke Fund. I've sent that email to all of the various groups that I work with in the community, so hopefully we'll have a full turnout. Maybe too many and we'll have to do 2 rides. Who knows?
What time of day again?
I booked it for the morning.
I'm in.
It's cooler in the morning
confirm.
and we won't sweat as much riding up the hill on McCarter. Thank you.
I have a few things I want to talk about. First of all, I wanted to tell you all, Council, that at the RDN, we passed a resolution on marine litter that we're going to send to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities annual conference in June of this year. And the reason it's going to directly to the FCM is because we didn't have time. The timing wasn't right for AVICC, but it's a big enough issue that I think it should be brought directly to the attention. So if I may read the resolution for you, I think it's worthwhile. Moved by Director Westbrook, seconded by Director Fell, that the following resolution be forwarded to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities for consideration at the annual conference. Whereas the United Nations Environmental Program estimates that 8 million tons of the plastic produced globally every year finds its way into our oceans, food chains, and ecosystems, damaging our health in the process. And whereas over 202,080 kilometers of coastline, Canada has one of the longest interfaces with oceans and bodies of water of any country on the planet. And whereas well-designed laws can help reverse this global trend, resolved that the Federation of Canadian Municipalities urge the federal government to develop a national strategy to mitigate and manage marine litter. So we'll let you know how that works out when we go to FCM. The other thing I wanted to tell you is that on March the 30th, the same day as in the afternoon as your consultation process with regards to homelessness, Councillor Beale, at 6:30 in this room, the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere region is going to be having an expose of the amazing places. So it'll be celebrating the 10 amazing places, of which our beach is one. I have here Parksville Civic and Technology Center from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. on March the 30th. So hopefully everybody can attend. Lastly but not least, I want to remind everyone that they have budget meetings scheduled for March the 29th, which is a week from Wednesday, and April the 10th. So if required, please check the city's website for information on how you can participate in the discussion. And finally, on March the 25th, in partnership with VIU, the city will host a World Cafe and open house at the Parksville Community and Conference Center. The World Cafe will build on the Parks in the Street exercise and is intended to draw ideas from citizens on what they would like to see for the future of their parks and trails. Information is on the city website. Yes, Councillor Rhodes.
Yes, Your Worship. A couple of days ago, you sent an email along about discussing an initiative that came to us from a representative from BC Healthy Living. So I move that the City of Parksville endorse the Community is on the Move initiative.
Thank you. I had that under my file. So seconded by Councillor Burton.
I wouldn't be offended if someone moved referral of this to staff for the impacts of us signing on to this endorsement. My research shows that there's not a lot, but I'd be okay for having staff some input too.
Everybody okay with that? Okay.
Well, I can't make a move for referral.
Okay, so can somebody make you'll move the referral? Okay, Mrs. Comas, have you got all the information? I've got it here. Okay, thank you. What's that?
Yes, seconded to referral.
Oh, okay.
Called to question.
All those in favor? Thank you. Okay. Special business. I need a mover and a seconder to move into a closed meeting pursuant to section 91C, D, and E of the Community Charter. Moved by Councillor Burton, seconded by Councillor Salter. All those in favor? We are moved into a, I don't have to do that, do I? I do. All those in favor? We're moving. Okay, thank you. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, a much-needed break by yours truly.